Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes, so just take your seats, and in 2 or 3 minutes, we'll start. Good morning, everyone. We are just starting. We are at the beginning of the 3-day online conference, which is condensed into a few hours each day from the 12th to the 14th of March. And just let's start with some technical details. You can choose to follow the event on either the English or the Bulgarian channel. Language switching is accessible through the interpretation button in the bottom menu of Zoom. I hope that every single one of us is aware of how Zoom works, so it should be pretty easy. Each presentation will last approximately for 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session, question and answer session. So you can pose questions to the presenters using the Q&A button. And I'm Svetoslav Stoikov, and for the next 3 days, I'll be moderating this event with the assistant of my colleague Iva Popov, that you can all see here. And I'm happy to welcome you to the 7th edition of the Clean Energy for People International online conference. And this event has really grown throughout the years from its inception, its beginning of in 2018. And hosted by Za Zemiata, Friends of the Earth Bulgaria, in collaboration this year with Bankwatch Network. The event extends special thanks to all of the presenters and panelists for their significant contributions to the content of this and all previous events. Clean energy for people, as I mentioned, has continually evolved and transformed since the first edition in 2018. And the primary emphasis of the conference revolves around exploring viable pathways for efficient and impactful building renovation of Central and Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. As an event organized by a Bulgarian NGO, we inherently give particular importance to the local matters, even when we make an effort not to. And we value your understanding of the understanding of our international viewers as we engage in discussions about Bulgaria from time to time, acknowledging the significance of addressing local perspectives and issues. And this event is focused on content. There will be no speeches or salutations, and we're going to dive straight into the substantive discussions of the topics. And you can find the whole program of the 3 days at the website of the conference, energiazahorata.com. And the entire event is also going to be recorded and will be made available in the public domain afterwards. It is actually currently currently being able to see it in YouTube and in the Facebook pages of Za Zemiata. So the thing is that this means that anyone who wishes to revisit specific details or has missed the event can still watch it later. And our goal is to reach as wide an audience as possible, so we kindly ask you for your assistance in spreading the word. A little bit about today, what we're going to do today. Today, we're going to focus on the need, efforts, and challenges of renovating the residential building stock of Central and Eastern Europe. Leave no one behind, or the case for renovating single-family dwellings will be at the forefront of the day. And this is a topic that is just starting to appear in the professional discussions in Bulgaria. Until now, the predominant renovation initiatives in the country have exclusively targeted multifamily residential buildings. And so how do we ensure inclusivity in building renovation, and how can we draw attention to the 1.2 million single-family buildings in the country and address the needs of their inhabitants? These are something that we're going to talk about today. And so now let's get started. I'm going to give the floor to our first presenter. Maybe we can, Jerson, if you are available, you can start. I'm just going to present you briefly because we're slightly running ahead of time. The first presenter for the day today, we're going to have 3 presentations and then a discussion panel. So let me talk a little bit about the presentations that we're going to have today. We are going to have a presentation on EU Buildings Climate Tracker, a call for faster and bolder action in Central and Eastern Europe. This is going to be our first presentation by Gerson Alexis Amarocho from Building Performance Institute Europe. And then we're going to follow with a presentation from Dominic Bach, who is working in KfW since 2012. And it's one of the, and KfW, it's one of the banks who really started promoting investments in energy efficiency in Europe, especially in Germany. So the presentation is going to be about promoting energy efficient refurbishment in the case of Germany. We're going to close the presentation panels with the third presentation from Teodoro Peneva from WWF Bulgaria about the Social Climate Fund in Bulgaria and designing measures for it. Then we're going to have a short break and jump into the round table, which is probably the most interesting part of the day for me. And the round table is going to revolve around the discussion of just the renovating of the single family housing stock. How can we start this process and what should we do? So our first presenter, as I mentioned, it's part of Buildings Performance Institute Europe, and he is a senior researcher there. His current activities are focused on understanding the progress of decarbonization of the building stock at the EU level and globally. He has worked previously on the integration of microgrids and smart buildings, optimization of buildings operation, decision-making processes for buildings renovation, digitalization of the construction industry. Gerson, the floor is yours, and you can start when you wish to.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much first for the invitation and giving us the chance to share a bit of what we're doing at BPIE. I think by now you should see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what is the idea for today? I hope I will offer you an overview of the building stock, so you will understand a bit what is the status of the decarbonization of the building stock, and then after that, I hope the other topics of the other presentations give you more in-depth details of the situation. But the idea here will be to present an overview of what's happening. We started the EU Buildings Climate Tracker a couple of years ago. And the idea is to monitor how the decarbonization of the building stock is doing. In the second edition that was released at the end of last year, we presented actually in-depth analysis of the CE region. So initially the idea was to monitor the decarbonization at the EU level, but in the second edition, we included also the results for the CE region, and those are the ones I'm going to show you and present you today. Yes, so what is the EU Buildings Climate Tracker? The idea is that it's a composed index. We have 5 indicators that we monitor, and we put them together, and we obtain an index of the decarbonization of the building stock. What's the idea? Like, the idea is to monitor how are we doing in terms of the goal of having a climate neutral building stock by 2050. So what's the goal of the tracker? The idea is to answer different questions, like how has the decarbonization of the building stock evolved since 2015? when the Paris Agreement was signed. If the building stock is improving enough in the decarbonization, and if it's not, to what degree, or what is the improvement that needs to be done. Um, so as I said, basically, what we do is to monitor 5 different indicators. We monitor CO2 emissions, final energy consumption, renewable energy share, cumulative investments in renovation, and the annual domestic energy expenditures per household. Um, of course, we understand that some of these indicators are, let's say, could have a higher level of importance. So we assign some weights to them. On the left, you will see that the emissions and the final energy consumption have the highest weights, and so on. So we integrate them, and we obtain the final index that I'm going to show you in the next slide. The data for the monitoring is obtained from Eurostat, from the European Environment Agency, Odyssey, and PIEC. So we gather the data, as I said, starting in 2015, and we monitor what is happening. We don't do predictions, so that's very important. Like, we limit, or the goal of the tracker is to look at what is happening and the observations that we have. In the second edition, we have the data available till 2020. So I will show you the results of what happened between 2015 and 2020. For some of the indicators, the data for 2021 was available, so I will present you that, just for everyone to see what the entire data set available, but all the results, or let's say all my statements, are based on the data for 2020. So what we do, we basically have a path that we would like the building stock to follow. So the idea is that we take as reference what it was the status in 2015. That's the starting point. And we follow that path till 2050, where we expect to reach the final goal of having a climate neutral building stock. This path is defined based on the MITS scenario, and it has some milestones in 2030. So we observe what is happening and see if the building stock is following this path or not. When we look at the EU level, these are the results. So we see, just a bit of an explanation how to read this figure. The light path, as I said, is the reference path, is the path that we expect the building stock to follow, and the dark path are the observations. So we see that in EU, after 2017, has been some progress. Nevertheless, not enough to follow the path. By 2020, there is a gap of around 10 points between the observations and the path, the reference path. If we look at the CE region, the situation is a bit more, or it's worse, let's say. We see here again, these are the observations, and what we see is that we have been under the starting point even in most of during all the years, and by 2020 the gap is increasing. There is a trend here of an opening that's a bit worrying, but hopefully, yeah, some actions will be taken, and the carbonization of the building stock will go in the right direction. What is important here is to see that the most that the efforts are delayed, those efforts will be higher. At the beginning, starting in 2015, we needed around 3.6 points of the carbonization every year. by 2020, because there was the lack of progress, now we need 5.7 points every year if we want to catch up by 2030. So here is very important to see that the lack of progress will translate into more pressure and higher efforts that will have to be made to correct the path and to go back to the reference path to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. But from where is this gap coming? As I said, this is the final index that is kind of translating or gathering and aggregating what is happening with the other indicators. So in the following slides, I will show you what is happening with each of the indicators. Something I forgot to mention, we monitor what is happening in the residential and in the service sectors. In the presentation today, I will just show you the indicators that are related to the residential sector. You can see the rest of the results in the report if you want to have more details. Or yeah, we can maybe discuss at the end in the QA session. So if we look at the CO2 emissions, so a bit of, again, how to read this graph. The dark blue are the observations, and the light blue are the path that the indicator should be following. Also, please keep in mind that the y-axis is only showing a portion, just to facilitate the reading of the figure. So when we look at the CO2 emissions from the energy used in households, we see that there was some progress between 2018 and 2019. Nevertheless, in 2020, again, there was an increase, and actually the CO2 emissions are more than 20% higher than the expected value. And it's also a bit worrying that the CO2 emissions there in 2020 went also almost back to the level where they started in 2015. If we look at the final energy consumption, we'll see actually that the final energy consumption of the residential sector has been higher during the entire period, higher than the reference starting point in 2015. Again, in 2020, we see that the final energy consumption is almost 15% higher than the expected value. Yeah, of course, this can be related to different factors, as the increase of home office practices, for instance, in 2020, due to the restrictions of the COVID pandemic, and so on. We also see that there was even a higher increase in 2021. There are also different factors that can be related to this, as the fact that the winter in 2021 was the coldest winter experience in the last decade. So, of course, this increased the heating needs, for instance, for the households. If we look at the renewable energy for heating and cooling, in the CE region, we see that the share of energy from renewables for heating and cooling has been increasing. Nevertheless, there is a decrease between 2020 and 2021. This could be due to different reasons. The final energy consumption, as I mentioned before, increased. So that makes that other sources or other conventional sources produce also more energy, impacting the share of the renewable. But there is also changes in the methodology. For instance, in the methodology, how the member states report to Eurostat, due to the changes in in the methodology to report sources as biomass, for instance. And that change occurred between 2020 and 2021. So that decrease can also be related to that. As you can see, in 2020, the share of renewables is almost 10 percentage points lower than the goal. If we look at renewables in the gross electricity consumption, again, we see a gap of also almost 10 percentage points by 2020. If we move into the investments for renovation, these are accumulated investments. So you will see that they always increase, but it's because we are accumulating what is happening in the previous year. By 2020, we see that the investments are 40% lower than the expected value. It's important here to mention that for the CE region, we only have data for 4 countries. And that's something I will mention later. But that's one of the let's say principle of the main challenges to monitor the renovation activities, to monitor the investments in renovation. There is a lack of data, and that also makes difficult to understand what is happening and what can be done better. So yeah, we see that there is also a gap for the investment of those 4 countries. Yeah, so all in all, and sorry, this is the last indicator. We see here the annual domestic energy expenditure per households. Here we see a bit more fluctuations. This is due to the fact that we aggregate the expenditures based on the area of the countries. So there are some fluctuations in some of the big countries as Poland and Romania. So that makes the changes. But by 2020, we see that the energy expenditures are higher, around 6% higher than the reference value. We expected them to be lower. And here is important also to see that we are talking about 2020. Once the data for 2021 and 2022 is available, probably this indicator will be performing worse due to the energy crisis and so on. So here is very important to keep that in mind, that even if let's say 6% here may not look that big, we expect or we foresee that the situation in 2021, 2022 will be a bit more complicated, let's say. So this is just to give you an idea, because of course we present all the indicators in absolute values, but it's difficult to understand or to compare, let's say, indicators that are in different units. So what we do is we normalize and we, let's say, translate all those indicators to the same scale, so you can understand or you can see better what are the indicators that are actually performing the worst. So here you will see that the gap actually in the CO2 emissions for the residential sector and the final energy consumption for the residential sector, the gap is really, really big. Of course, here you can also see the service sector, but as I said, I would like to focus today in the discussion of the residential sector. If we move to the other 4 indicators, here we also see that the gap in the share of renewables for heating and cooling is considerable. The renewables for electricity also, and the energy expenditures in households. So yeah, all this can be summarized as that the situation right now in the sea region is that five of the five out of the five indicators are off track, except for some let's say good performance of certain indicators in the service sector and so on. And the reality is that the gap for most of the indicators is significant, and we need to do something. We need to take some action to try to correct the status and move the direction of the path towards the reference path to achieve a climate neutral building stock. So why is this important? Or why we should take action? The carbonization of the building stock definitely plays a key role in achieving the climate goals that can affect us all with the different climate events and so on. The operation of the residential building only is produce more than 70% of the CO2 emissions of the building stock. So if we take action to improve how our buildings operate, how our buildings are built, and etc., we can receive different benefits related to energy security, to have less dependency on gas and or fossil fuels, industry development, and so on. And the next two slides, I will just show you a bit what is the situation of the residential sector in the CE region and why it's important, as I said. If we look at the population living in a dwelling with a leaking roof and other conditions, we see that there are some countries that are even higher. These numbers are very high from my perspective, but even if we compare to the average, there are also some countries that are higher than that. Or the inability to keep the home adequately warm. We also see that there are some countries where the numbers are considerably higher compared to the others or to the EU. So this shows the relevance of why we really need to act on the residential sector and try to improve the conditions, the living conditions of the inhabitants. If we look at the differentiation between multifamily buildings and single family houses in the CE region, in most of the countries, actually, you will see that the pink bar in the middle is higher than the green one that represents the apartment blocks. So most of the area of the residential building stock is actually single family houses. So they're definitely a sector that we should pay attention to and that we should take some actions. All in all, this is my last slide. I would like just to quickly mention some recommendations about how it's important to prioritize the renovation. We also need to focus on decarbonizing the building heating systems. As I showed, there is a big gap in the progress there. We need to accelerate the implementation of support. We need to make information available for the homeowners and other actors that can take the actions. And something that I mentioned before, and I would like to mention again, is monitoring the building renovation activities. We need to understand what activities are being implemented, what is the money that is being invested, and because this is the only way we can really understand how we can improve things, and this data is really not easy available, and yeah, the governments need to do something on this regard if they want to really create and develop a program and a mechanism to move the renovation forward. Um, yeah, you can find the two reports, the first edition and the second edition, in our website. There you will find all the full details of for the EU as well, for the service sector. And yeah, with that, I would like to hear the questions.
Uh, Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really interesting to see the difference between EU and CE and what is happening actually there. Why do we have this increasing gap? We have several questions here from the audience, and the first one is about the data that you have used, and it is from which year is the EU statistics on income and living conditions data that you have used in the research?
Yeah, for the last slides that I showed you, that's 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, thank you. And one more question about the data we have. How do you and your team guarantee the precision of the data input? We are all aware that the research quality is directly correlated with the accuracy of the data. And do you think that the data you are using is closely related to what is actually happening on the ground in the different countries?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we use data from Eurostat. So, there is the whole procedure of how the member states should register or, provide the information to Eurostat. We also use information from the European Environment Agency and from FIEC. We actually get in contact with some of the let's say data suppliers. We have been in contact with FIEC, we have been in contact with Odyssey to understand how the data is collected. And probably you don't see it in the presentation due to the time, but in the report you will see that we do an effort of understanding let's say the preliminary results that we obtain from the indicators. We bring them down to what is happening in the country. So we try to understand, okay, we link those results to what happened at the example that I mentioned with the weather. We saw, okay, something happened in the final energy consumption, but why suddenly the trend changed? So we go and check, let's say, additional indicators and try to understand if it makes sense or not, let's say. And in that case, we found out that, yeah, actually 2020 was the warmest winter that we had in ever registered, and 2021 was the coldest one. So we do like that, let's say this triangulate, like this additional analysis of understanding what the results that we're seeing in the data, if they are actually reflecting what is happening in due to different situations. We also did, for instance, the analysis of for some specific countries to see how the final energy consumption was related to the energy expenditures and was related to, for instance, the salaries of the country, to understand if what the results that the initial data was showing us. So we understand that data is definitely an issue. As I said, sometimes it is not even available, but we do an effort to look for different sources and different indicators or different perspectives that can help us to put everything in the same level, let's say, and see if it makes sense.
Thank you for the answer. We have two more questions. Maybe they're going to be short, maybe long. It really depends on you. The first one is according to your study, all five indicators are off track for Central and Eastern Europe. And so, what are the low-hanging fruits that the countries can do? What they could immediately start to improve?
Ooh. Okay. Yeah, I think is what is interesting of looking at the five indicators that you see that you have many let's say directions or many fields where you can take action, and I think that's important. It's like we don't depend only on one thing. We have many options, and we can do small efforts in all of them to start moving towards improving the building stock. Mm, what is definitely important is to improve the performance of the buildings in the terms of energy efficiency. Like that's probably one of the that will translate. Like working on that will translate to less CO2 emissions. That will translate to hopefully also to less energy expenditures for the households and to higher renovation rates and so on. So working on that one will, let's say, bring benefits to the others. And the carbonization of the heating systems and the electricity network, that's also a super important aspect. Like that's the only way to reduce the CO2 emissions due to the operation of buildings as well. Like because if we can improve the performance, but if we keep supplying based on fossil fuels, then so when these two, I do think they're very important, and they have to go together, because then we also have the other chance, the other way around. If we focus on having renewable sources, but we don't improve the performance of the buildings, then we just keep consuming a lot of energy that we could avoid that. So those two, I think, are very important, and they will translate into benefits.
Thank you. And one final question we have from Zoom, and it is the service sector is showing rather good decarbonization progress. It's a statement, I guess. We and the other sectors, public and residential, should learn from their experiences and build on. Are there initiatives in this direction?
Um, yeah, it could be. How do I? So for the present, I didn't have the figure actually here, but maybe that could have been a bit misleading when in the track, because in the report we explained it. We just focus on 2020, but what happened in 2020, due to the restrictions of COVID, most of the service sector reduced their activities. So the final energy consumption of the service sector reduced, the CO2 emissions reduced. So from the data, you could think, oh, the service sector is doing actually well. But in the report was explained, actually, when you look to 2020, you see the rebound effect, and you see how even the service sector was consuming even more than before the pandemic. So I don't know if the statement maybe came from that figure, from the table that I presented today. But it's important to understand that if we look only at 2020, we can think that service sector is doing well, but it's actually, when we look forward, we'll see the rebound. Of course, there are things that are better, are happening better, I could say, probably in the service sector in terms of efficiency. But I think it's also, I wouldn't say it's difficult to extend what is happening there. It's just that the the structures are different, the interests are different. So it's definitely the private sector is more interested in improving the service sector and so on. So of course, the renovation activities can be, the lessons there can be extended to the residential sector. digitalization of the construction processes that are being deployed for the service sector can be also extended to the residential sector. So there are definitely things that could be taken as lessons learned, but I just want to mention that it's important if we are talking about the performance itself of the buildings, we need to look at the whole picture. And in the report, you will see that 2021 kind of give the rebound effect. And
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your presentation and for your involvement today. Um, of course, if you want, you can continue to watch. It is going to be really, really interesting. Especially, I guess one of the highlights from the conference. It's the next presentation, at least for me. And I'm really glad that Dominic Bach, Dr. Dominic Bach, he agreed to participate in our event. I'm just going to do short introduction of his, and then I'm going to share his presentation because he is joining from a phone, from his phone, due to the restrictions in his workplace. Dr. Dominic Bach studied political science and contemporary history at the University of Bonn in Germany and in Sussex, UK. He holds a PhD in political sciences from the University of Bonn. And from 2007 to 2011, he was first assistant and later a head of cabinet to a member of the European Parliament in the ITRE committee chairman at the time, with a focus on energy policy. In September 2012, he joined KfW as a senior policy officer in Brussels. And in his position, he mirrors all domestic promotional activities in KfW in Brussels and monitors all relevant policies that directly or indirectly impact those activities, except for regulatory topics. And so, Dominic, I'm just going to share my screen and load your presentation. So just give me guidance where I need to change the slides. Um, I'm just going to do that quickly. Give me a second.
Yeah, thank you very much. You've already taken 1 point away from the introduction, which would have been to introduce myself. Okay, but obviously you can hear me. That's very good. And thank you very much also, Svetlana, for having me, for having asked me to present. And thank you very much to the colleague from BPI for actually setting the scene. It was also very interesting for me to have a look at the CEE. We will now be moving away a little bit from the CEE and focusing on our experience with promoting financing of energy efficiency in buildings in Germany, the experience we've had over the last 20 years. I will very briefly give you a glimpse of what KfW actually is and does before really jumping into the topic of today. And also, I have included 2 slides from the brand new setup of the program. I received the slides only while I was waiting actually for my flight last week at the airport, and everything was in German. And it has gotten somewhat more complex. So the idea now was to actually focus more on success factors, so more in an abstract manner, because in any case, I doubt you will want to copy the case of Germany. It's not feasible. So the idea was to go one level beyond that and to think about, okay, why was the program successful in the first place? With this, let's go to the next slide. Which is KfW at a glance. And I will only give you a very few really highlights. First of all, it's important to understand we are a national promotional bank. We have a national mandate. The shareholders are the Federal Republic of Germany, 80%, as well as the German Länder. So Germany is a federal state, so we have the federal level and we have the level of the Länder, such as Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, and so forth. So they are also shareholders. We've been established in 1948. So even before the Federal Republic of Germany was established, and it was a British idea. So we're very thankful to the Brits in this respect. We started up, the idea was to set us up to use the Marshall funds, so the European Recovery Program funds, in a revolving manner, actually. Many countries use them simply as grants. And here British idea was to set up a bank, and de facto, thanks to this, we are still using these funds today for some of the promotional programs we have. We are regulated, and we're under supervision of the German Federal Ministry of Finance and the German Financial Supervisory Authority, the BaFin, as well. We have headquarters in Frankfurt, which is where nearly all banks in Germany have their headquarters, but we also have branches for historical reasons in Berlin and Bonn, and we have one daughter company also located in Cologne. Otherwise, we do not have a branch network, but we'll come to this again later. If we go to the next slide, you will see the mega trends, as we call them, which are guiding our thinking on promotional activities. And of course, one very important mega trend is climate change and the environment, which includes also biodiversity. We are working on a biodiversity strategy, and we have rolled out the first programs which are supporting biodiversity as well. Then digitalization and innovation. Globalization, hugely important for the German economy. It has now for decades really been very much export oriented, so that's a very important focus area as well. And social change or societal changes, including, I mean, you probably all know demographic changes. We, for example, also have special support programs that will allow you to finance the removal of barriers inside your home. So that elderly people, for example, can live longer within their own four walls, which is hugely important. First of all, mostly want to live at home, and not have to move again at the old age. And it also removes more strain on basically the social insurance if you manage to live in your own four walls for a long period of time. So we focus on a variety of areas. We are not like the EIB, who wants to be the climate bank only, just because we think there are different challenges out there, and we would like to keep a broader view onto these challenges and to implement them. Maybe a very short excursion, because what does a national promotional bank do? Or in general, in politics, you can, because we're a tool, we're a political tool to some extent, for the government, implementing certain policies. When you implement certain policies, you have the sticks, which is basically regulation, which forces somebody to do something. You can be forced to renovate your home, for example, if we come to our example. We are not the stick, we are the carrot. So we'll be talking about carrots today, but still this carrot is attached to a relatively long stick. I mean, this is how we do it in Germany, at least. You will need to stretch yourself to reach the carrot. So for example, we will not support business as usual. We will not support the changing of a light bulb. We will intervene, or you will receive public support when you really go beyond just what can easily be done. So we will not focus on the low-hanging fruit, but rather on deep retrofit. This is the system how it is set up in Germany. Just as a general point for your understanding, but I think it's very important to keep this in mind, and you will see what I mean when we focus on the program as such. If we come to the next slide, very briefly, you will see that we are not only active within Germany, that's the left part of the slide here, domestic promotion. When we look at SMEs, from the very beginning, we have a focus on SME support, private clients, for example, also residential buildings here. We also look at public clients there at the municipal level, and we have KfW Capital for equity products. They invest in funds that themselves then again invest in startups, for example. But we also have the area of international financing within KfW with the IPEX Bank, which is our commercial arm, a daughter company, and as well as development finance through KfW, the development branch, and also KfW DG, they're active in the field of development finance. How do we do that? If we look at the next slide, our main instruments. And what I will be focusing on here, because this is what we use for the program, is in the top left, the on-lent loans with very low refinancing rates. Often, especially for buildings, it's an additional interest rate subsidy as well. And typically, we can also go longer term maturities than a commercial bank would tend to do necessarily. And this often combined with the bottom right, which are the non-refundable grant elements. So we combine the loan with a grant to set up this financial instrument. We have others, but for the programs we will be looking at today, the on-lent loans and the grant elements are key. So with this, let's focus on buildings. And as you can see from the figures, I haven't included the most recent ones. It has been quite a success story since the introduction of the program as such. I believe even it was first introduced in 2004. I mean, here we start with 2006. And you can see there has been quite a large increase in demand. Now, that's not only, of course, because we are so great. We also had, over the last years, until, say, the COVID pandemic and the rise of inflation, a very low interest rate environment, which has made it also very attractive and easier, obviously, to take up a loan for many. But still, I mean, you can see it has been a very, very big success story, and we have constantly been working on the program, trying to improve it, make it easier again to use, etc. And in the end, it has paid out. You will see two different things. I mean, for example, you see the 240 billion. I think it's more than 240 billion now. This is the loans we have handed out, the commitment volumes from KfW, and at the bottom right, you will also see the 540 billion in investments triggered. This is because we typically do not finance the full amount needed for the refurbishment, but we incentivize and we finance basically this extra mile. So the total investment will be bigger. I mean, either than the customer has equity, own savings that are being used, or takes up an additional loan to finance other things as well, not just the energy part, the energy efficiency part. So total investment triggers are higher than just the amount of the loans we are handing out. And obviously, we also monitor then how many jobs have been secured, the CO2 emissions that have been saved on an annual basis, and so forth, extrapolated from the data, looking at what has been done concretely in the refurbishment. So personally, I would also say it was a huge success. And the question is, how did we get there? What are at least some of the success factors? And with this, we come to the next slide. Indeed, first of all, the success factor having a public mandate by the government. And I mean, it is part of our law concerning KfW that mentions both the environmental protection, so from the very beginning, and also the housing is explicitly stated. So put the two together and you know more or less what it is that you are supposed to be doing. But also there has been over many years a large consensus that in order to achieve the very ambitious goal of now having a decarbonized building stock by the year 2050, you cannot only work with the sticks, but you also need carrots. You also need to incentivize people to go this extra mile. And that's why really over many, many, many years, throughout several governments, really, we have been able to receive the budget. Obviously, a budget needs to be agreed on an annual basis, and it's also obvious that a promotional bank, even though it's promotional, we cannot simply hand out grants. The grants need to be coming from the federal budget. We have very low refinancing costs. That's another success factor. We'll come to that in a minute. But on top of that, we would use the public budget to lower the interest rates even further, and for the grant component. Yeah. And such a program because it is complex. It needs time to set up, it needs time to advertise it and so forth. So it needs to run over a long period of time. And in order to do that, you need a broad consensus at political level. Even with changing coalitions, you just need it, otherwise it will not work. All right. The next success factor, as I already briefly mentioned, is our excellent refinancing condition on the market. Unlike, for example, the French Caisse des Dépôts, or in France in general, there is no livret A in Germany. You might have heard of it. It's a special savings account, and part of these proceeds can be used then to support investments into the real economy. We do not have this in Germany, so we are refinancing ourselves on the capital market, and the better our refinancing condition, obviously, the more support we can also give. We transfer these excellent refinancing conditions to the final beneficiary in the end. So it's a little bit like the EIB also at European level. They also look very much at their rating, because it's thanks to their rating that they can really offer attractive products. And this is the same here. I will just maybe very briefly mention the last point here. Last year, for example, we refinanced ourselves in the range of 90 billion euros, which includes also green bonds. Green bonds are obviously a very important and increasingly important part of our refinancing. Let's now look at the third success factor. And this is a very interesting one. In many countries within probably around the world, not just in the EU, you have a banking sector that is very much dominated, let's say, by a handful of banks. This is not the case in Germany. In Germany, you have, of course, some of the larger banks, Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, and a few others. But you also have literally thousands, probably, of small, especially local banks, such as Sparkassen, Volksbanken, Raiffeisenbanken, and so forth. And what we do not have a branch network on our own, but we work through all of these banks, which means for the final beneficiary, in the end, he doesn't need to come to Frankfurt. He simply goes to his bank that he knows. The bank knows the final beneficiary and is able to access our promotional products through this bank. So it's a very simple way to reach out. And at the same time, we do not distort competition within the German banking sector and so forth, given we cooperate with all these banks. So we have a gigantic outreach with very few people actually behind it, de facto. I mean, overall in Germany, we are usually the third or fourth or fifth largest bank. But in terms of employees, we have by now 8,100 roughly. So we are tiny compared to the large banks. And this is one of the reasons for this is that we have this on-lending principle, and the distribution channel is every single bank branch you have in Germany, de facto. The banks need to be accredited with us and so forth. But I mean, given we were established quite a few decades ago, 75 years now, de facto, we really work with all of them. And this is very important to understand. All right, if we now come to the next one. If you really want to treat a high number of loans within a year, say 300,000 or even more, obviously what you need to do is to standardize. And if you want to advertise the product, you also need to create a brand. And this is what we try to do. You can always try to, I don't know, read the building codes. Maybe I should try to read out the building code to my daughter in the evening. She might go to sleep more easily than with all the exciting books that I'm reading currently. It's very, very difficult, and it's very difficult to explain. So what it is that we do is we try to simplify to the maximum by looking at the primary energy demand of a building, and as a secondary requirement to look at the heat loss. And for that, you will be able to identify values. And if you look at the next slide, these are past standards, but it shows you how we use these values to come up with a brand. So for example, the reference building which is included in the energy efficiency ordinance for new buildings, mind you, is set at the value of 100%. This is the legal requirement you need to achieve when you construct a new building. And based on this, we have created the KfW Efficiency House standards. So for example, the Efficiency House Standard 55, which only has 55% of the primary energy demand compared to the reference building and 70% of the transmission heat loss compared to the reference building. So this is a scheme that we have established very successfully. And I mean, I'm based in Brussels, not in Germany, but whenever I drove through Germany in the past years, very often looking at also new construction, the companies having constructed these buildings would very often advertise them using a KfW Efficiency House standard. So it's very interesting to see how the standard has really evolved and penetrated the markets themselves. Leaving these past standards, we'll now come to the current ones in the next slide. Waiting for it. Here we go. Now, we look at refurbishment. And given the standards have evolved quite a bit over the last years also, we now only have the heritage protected standards. Again, where you get a redemption grant of 5%. We have the Efficiency House 85, but only for residential buildings. Again, you get a redemption grant of 5%. For the 70 standard, I mean, you need to imagine, for example, you have a building from 1970s and refurbish it to a standard which goes beyond the legal requirement for a new building. So this is quite something already, where you then get a grant element of 10%. For 55 standard 15%, and for the Efficiency House or building 40, even 20% redemption grant. But this is a gigantic investment. I mean, you need to imagine, take a house from even the 60s or 70s or early 80s, to reach the standard, you will need to invest quite a lot. As I said, the program has become much more complex because now we also have renewable and sustainable class buildings, where you get an additional 5%, either renewable or sustainability class. You get an additional grant element when your building belongs to the worst performing buildings. So you get an additional bonus. As I said, we're the carrots, yeah? So we work with bonuses, with grant elements. There is a bonus, at least partially, when it comes to the most efficient ones for serial renovation, because this is something, I think the Dutch invented it with Energiesprong, which can really save you a lot of costs also. But for this, you need to look at neighborhoods, and you really need to convince people that it makes sense to renovate now. And with prefabricated parts, you need a certain amount of buildings that are being renovated there at the same time. So, I mean, there is an additional, it's more complicated to some extent in the planning phase, and you need to convince people and so forth. So, but afterwards, it's also much quicker very often. Yeah? And this is why we really try to incentivize this serial renovation, because in the end, it saves costs. Yeah? So there you go. The entire picture has become more complicated. All of this, obviously, as I already indicated, we will not finance the total cost, but for residential buildings, we have a limit of 120,000 euro per housing unit. So if you have a multi-apartment building, obviously, you will get more. If it's just 2 housing units, the maximum amount will be 240. Unless it's, again, this renewable class or sustainability class, then you get a higher amount, which is 150 per housing unit. For non-residential buildings, because we also have included non-residential buildings relatively early on, but not from the very beginning, there we look at total amount per square meter net flow area, and we have a total cap of 10 million euros per project. So this, in a nutshell, is the new setup. Now, let's go further, because it's not the only success factor. We have another one, First of all, nowadays, everything's digitalized. I mean, you have your smartphone, you have your tablet and so forth. You want things to move fast. You don't want to print out paper and write on paper, having to send it to KfW, and then weeks later you might get a reply and so forth. No, you want it to be fast. So we have digitalized the entire process and sped it up thereby also. And at the same time, you will need to involve an energy expert. So it's an additional stick in the end. As I said, you need to stretch to profit from the public support. Why do we involve this expert? First of all, the expert will come to your place, will have a look at the building. And we had it in the family, and the expert then said, well, look, I mean, you have changed the heating system not too long ago. It's still good. I wouldn't recommend doing this. The walls, well, surprise, they had been insulated already by my grandparents. So thank you very much for that. It's not the best available today on the market, but it's not faulty or anything. It has been done very nicely. It's still good for a number of years, say the next 10 years or so. And then after that, it might make sense to do that. But look at your roof. Your roof definitely needs to be redone, and very soon. So if you redo the roof, you should immediately go for a KfW efficiency house standard. It would be an individual measure because you don't have to do everything, and so forth. So he really comes there and he guides you through what makes sense now, what makes sense later. He can come up with a roadmap for you, yeah, and say, okay, this really needs to be done now. But then I would recommend within the next 5 or 10 years to do this and this and this, which helps you plan also, and later on really have a very nicely fully refurbished home. This is one aspect. The other aspect, since we are not on site, we need somebody to confirm to us that the works have actually been carried out and that a certain standard has been achieved. And this is again done by the energy expert. Only if we have this confirmation, you will profit from the partial debt relief. So you will have to pay back less from the loan. So for us, it gives us assurance that indeed it has been reached. At the same time, for the owner, it gives additional insurance because he really checks that the works have been carried out properly. Yeah. So it basically creates a win-win-win situation, if you want. Of course, it will also cost some money, but you can also be, I mean, the cost can also be partially covered then through the program. With this, we come to the next slide. I know I'm aware of the time and there are questions already. I see this is just to show you the customer journey. So of course, accessing public funds will be slightly more complicated. It comes with a few strings attached, but we still try to have the customer journey as easy as possible. And the energy consultant, the energy expert, who needs to be independent, of course. We set up a database which contains by now, I think, about 13,000 throughout Germany. So again, you see, long-term really matters because you need time also to build it up. Will help you, guide you through the process as well. And you only need to go to your own bank and not come to Frankfurt, for example. Very last slide. To show you an additional and brand new aspect. Energy efficiency is, of course, one thing. But in Germany, we use a lot of gas and partially still other fossil fuels for heating. If we want to decarbonize the building stock, we need to address the heating. And this is the new aspect of the program. It's as an individual measure, in this case, obviously, where we look at systems engineering, solar thermal heating, biomass, heat pumps, fuel cells, H2 ready heatings, even district heating, or smaller building grids even. Yeah. And for this, you also receive grant components. If it's part of an individual building roadmap, there's an additional bonus, and there's an additional bonus also for those, let's say, low-income households. Yeah, because very often you have very high upfront costs. So to really reach as many as possible, the government decided to have an additional bonus for low-income households. That was a lot to digest. I will leave it here. Thank you very much for the attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions, and I'm confident that you will translate them into English for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see the questions that we have received. Just bear with me for a second.
Yeah, I just saw English already. How do you define a low-income household?
Yeah. You can start answering this one.
It's a very good one. As I said, I received the slides and everything, all the new product information while I was waiting for my flight. Then I was at the conference and then back. There is an 80 or even nearly 100-page FAQ document. I would need to have a look at this. I guess that the government then has a very clear definition of who falls under low-income household, looking at the household income, number of persons included in the household, and so forth, and they will have come up with a formula. But I cannot tell you now exactly what the formula looks like. But there, it's really the government that sets the thresholds. And it might be very different for Germany compared to Bulgaria, Romania, France, and so forth. Basically, it's a political decision in the end.
Yeah, we have an interesting question, and it is, but I guess it's going to be really hard to answer. And could the KfW story with supporting building renovations and heatings be replicated successfully in other countries? And this is actually the question that we all want to know the answer.
I mean, a very simple answer is yes, but you always need to adapt. Yeah. Because Germany is different to Estonia, is different to France, is different to Poland. I mean, I explained this mandatory involvement of an energy expert once to a Polish region, and they told me, in Poland, this would never work. We have zero trust in any such experts that are, but in a public database and so forth, it simply wouldn't work. I said, why not? Well, distrust. So we are all different. We have seen very interesting examples. For example, in Estonia with KADEX, they are rolling out a program as well for the energy refurbishment of buildings, which is inspired, let's say, by the KfW model, and then transposed to the national context. And it seems to be working very well. So if we discuss with them, they will also tell you what they did, what they changed. So that's also the reason why I sort of didn't present the nitty-gritty details, because they are hugely complex, but rather looked generally at success factors. And this can indeed be an inspiration. I wouldn't transpose it one-to-one. I think it doesn't make sense because the situation is different.
And one more we have, and this is regards with the last slide that you shown. And why has KfW decided to focus on heating systems as individual measures? And why now is the question.
Well, obviously, it takes time. We have many millions of buildings in Germany, so you have to start early. We should have maybe started even earlier. Secondly, of course, you all know probably that we are very much dependent, we were very much dependent on imports from Russian gas also. And with the war in Ukraine now, with the Russian aggression, lowering the gas consumption has been a major driver for all policies in this respect. Now, the respective law has been wildly debated for many months in Germany, if not for a year. And eventually they came up with a compromise. Finally, and we are now able to implement it. But really, with the heating system, it's probably one of the really decarbonizing the heating system is one of the major challenges. And de facto decarbonizing is electrifying. The French have done so much earlier. Well, because they are using nuclear energy, yeah, and they produce and produce and produce. At the same time, in very cold winters, they had to import electricity produced from coal power plants in Germany also to compensate the insufficient amount of electricity. So it really depends on, or if you try to really do as much as possible, also using renewable sources of energy and yeah. But there again, intermittent, so you also need to have the possibility of storing, so electricity storage and so forth. It's a very complex issue, and you cannot really start early enough.
Thanks a lot for your participation. I don't see any other questions that we have in our channels. So thanks a lot one more time, and we were really happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
With this, I want to give the floor to Teodora Peneva. Dr. Teodora Peneva is a senior expert in the climate and energy program at the WWF Bulgaria, and she is focusing on issues related to energy poverty and the Social Climate Fund. Dr. Peneva has over 20 years of project and research experience in the fields of energy and social protection, and continues to actively contribute to the development of the official definition of energy poverty in Bulgaria. Today, she is going to present us to do a presentation about designing measures for the Social Climate Fund in Bulgaria, and basically what will be the role of the Social Climate Fund in Bulgaria. So Teodora, you can just share your screen and get ready for the presentation.
Благодаря ви за поканата и за организацията на конференцията.
Thank you for your invitation for organizing this conference.
Ще си позволя да направя презентацията на български език.
I will present my information in Bulgarian. I hope you already see the screen. Now we see the screen. It was very interesting to listen the previous two presentations and to hear about the investment shortages in the Central and Eastern European countries, Germany's experience, which is very important as a prerequisite to improve our building stock. Today's presentation is part of the BUGES project that WWF Bulgaria works with Habitat Bulgaria. I will touch upon two parts, 2 points. I will start with brief presentation, the Social Climate Fund. Probably many of us are familiar with it, but the main parameters will have to be mentioned. And as potential measures, I will mention the measures of the Social Climate Fund and WWF Bulgaria, which we developed. The Social Climate Fund is very important because it is establishing itself as the only instrument as the Recovery and Resilience Plan for the building stock. This is quite insufficient, but it's I will start with its regulatory framework. The goal is to remove the negative effect or reduce the negative effect of the introduction of new emission trading system in the residential and public and transport sectors. As a matter of fact, the regulation of the Social Climate Fund was adopted in May last year and obliges the countries to develop plans by June 2025, which means we have 1 year to develop our plans and justify them well enough in order to receive funding under the fund. The Social Climate Fund itself will come into force in 2026 if the plans are approved by the Commission, and it comes into force a year before the emission trading system. And most importantly about the fund is that it has to be oriented towards vulnerable households, micro enterprises, and transport consumers. This is the area where grants and funding has to be developed with special criteria in that area. So it was very interesting for me to find out that the banks in not only Germany, but in many other countries provide much better loan conditions for low-income households, and regardless of the criteria, they administer the process, they provide the assessment for the households and provide them with better conditions, which in the current situation in Bulgaria, since we already have a definition of energy poverty adopted in November 2023, which means that this should be applicable in Bulgaria as well at the current moment. It is very important to know that we already have active definition, and regardless of the fact that the grant schemes provide different conditions, we can introduce many measures for energy poor households. That means that the Social Climate Fund will mark the beginning of the work, because the work with low-income households by providing long-term measures. We also expect the Energy Efficiency Directive to come into force and should be transposed within 2 years, starting September 2023, which means that in 2025 we should have available additional instruments under this directive. And we need to prioritize the measures, energy efficiency measures for those that are energy poor. All these instruments should be coordinated by a long-term program. For that purpose, we adopted paragraph 7 for Article 8 to reduce the energy poverty and to remove the investment shortages. We should coordinate and be compensated by various funds. And the role of each one should not be undermined. As I already mentioned, we have the main parameters of the Social Climate Fund, and it is important to mention that the Commission is going to approve the efficiency of the measures.
Before I mention the measures, it's important to know what the impact of the new emissions trading schemes will be. There is a report which includes an assessment of the emissions per ton per person. You can see Bulgaria and the other member states. In light blue, you can see the emissions per person for heating and cooling, and in dark blue you can see the emissions from transport. Every country should design its social climate fund in such a way that it corresponds to its situation, because there are different ratios. In some countries, heating has a larger share, while in other countries like Bulgaria, 2/3 are occupied by transport, two-thirds in the emissions. And another important thing is that I haven't included all the data from their report, but you can read it. According to the estimations, these emissions will affect the member states with lower incomes, and this impact will be the result of the price of emissions forming on a single European market, but being true for all countries. And an example, with a price of 70 euro per ton per emission, the average impact varies between 0.3% of the costs of the households to 1.3% of the consumer costs in Hungary. The rising prices will minimally affect household budgets, but nevertheless, this fund will be there to address the needs in the short term and in the long term. And the report itself shows that the impact, let's say 1.3% for Hungary, this is the average for the whole country, it is much higher or several times higher as regards the lowest income groups of the population. You can also look at the additional costs which would be generated from this emissions trading schemes at 70 euro per ton without changes in the consumption. So with us, the elasticity of consumption is comparatively high, and if we have rising prices, it reduces. But without considering the changes in the consumptions, we can see that we'll have larger additional costs. You can see Bulgaria is the second bar from left to right. For transport to 0.5 or 6% of the income, and lower as regards heating. Nevertheless, these are the averages, and each evaluation of low-income groups would be different from these figures. So what are the possible measures and investments we envisage? The measures as they are in the regulation for the social climate fund are of three parts: direct support for incomes, which means temporary compensations for the rising prices once the emissions trading schemes are introduced in building and transport. This should be limited to 37.5% of all measures for all groups. So it shouldn't be more than this percent in each group, and the larger part of the support should be for longer term measures, mainly green investment in buildings, for energy saving, and for decarbonization of heating, and in the transport sector for zero carbon transport vehicles. There is another part for consultancies, information, education, and for building capacity in the executive agencies. The technical support is up to 2.5%. I'm not sure if we were able to take into advantage of this technical support now, but these are admissible measures in the climate plan. And on this basis, on the basis of the regulation and the guidelines, the estimations we have performed are the following. We start from the consumption. The final energy consumption, you can see top left, concerning the transport, is close to 60% of the total for the two sectors, for the buildings and transport, which means that for the households, we have 41% of the consumption. Of course, it's important how the separation of the funding will be done. The government will say this, whether on the basis of consumption or emissions, or a combination of these. I personally cannot say, but the minimal which should remain for the households is close to 40% of the fund, which means that if we have 2.2 billion euro, this is the resource for Bulgaria under this fund. Probably most of you know that Bulgaria is a net recipient of funds under the Social Climate Fund, because in Bulgaria As we saw from the emissions at the previous slides, what we will generate as revenues is very low. So we are the lowest revenue generator. We're the country with the least emissions. So internally, this fund will generate much less revenue than it will use. And since these revenues go to the same fund, we will receive more than we give. And these 2.2 billion euro for Bulgaria, if we leave 37% for direct payments, this will have to do with rising prices of fuels mainly. Up to 10% is the expected rise in prices, which will subsidizing vulnerable groups, let's say transport tickets and current costs. And what remains as a resource for the long-term investment is estimated to be 1.3 billion euro for transport. And out of these, 939, sorry, we have 1.3 billion euro for transport, including direct payment, and 939 million euro for households. And what remains for long-term measures is a smaller amount, about 140 million euro per annum for transport and under 100 million per year for buildings. I'm not sure how these amounts look to you. These are very insignificant. You can look at the table that if we limit up to 100 million per year, and we have a period from 26 to 32 for 5 or 6 years, it turns out that depending on the scope and the measures that we want to apply, we can encompass up to 50,000 households per annum, or not more than 250,000 households for the entire period, with the lowest measures up to 2,000 euro. You can see the red line dividing the measures. If you want to have longer term measures, deep renovation, this means working with 10,000 or 20,000 euro, which it would take to have an overall house renovation, given the prices of 2 or 3 years ago, which were inscribed in the long-term housing renovation plan. So we can support not more than 50 or 60,000 households for the entire period with the higher amounts. In this sense, we should consider that this is a limited resource, and it's very important to develop it as efficiently as possible. In this sense, our proposal is for two options: partial measures as one option, and overall total rehabilitation. Initially, we had set numbers, for example, 170,000 households for installing air conditioning and 500,000 for partial renovation measures, changing the windows, insulating the walls or the roof. But it turns out that if we work with such large amounts, this would mean spending the entire amount and not having any funds left. So we have reduced the options, but it's important, and the government will decide, but it's important for the household to be able to choose which measure to apply depending on what situation they're in, what their building is, or their house is, and to be able to choose the right measure for them, and then to regulate the quota for the measures at another level, or even not regulate it, but rather leave it at the market principle or at the supply and demand principle. if it is applied in the form of vouchers, households need to find the best option for themselves and to be stimulated apart from grant funding under the fund to be able to build on top of it in order to achieve better renovation and to have higher energy efficiency by adding their own financial resources. That's why, in general, the options which we have written have been borrowed from best practices from other countries. We are not offering anything new. We saw the experience of Germany some minute ago with the loans, how they stimulate decarbonization of heating in this way. And to see households will have more options for changing their windows, for having heat pumps and solar energy facilities in order to have flexible funding in the form of vouchers or higher credit resources for the lower income households. And since this resource is very limited, it should be combined with low interest bank loans and other tools, including energy communities, stimulating energy communities, which would be able to double the resources or the effect from this through adding private equity or own participation. This is our proposal. We believe that it's important for this tool to be used as efficiently as possible and to be in support of as many individuals as possible in order to launch working with the vulnerable groups and facilitate the entire process for the future. That's all from me. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or anything which we could discuss further, I'm at your disposal. Thank you.
Tudor, do you mind to ask you the questions in English or? Okay, so regarding the last slides that you showed, we actually invited representatives from the banking sector in Bulgaria because we thought that it is vital for the success of such programs and measures. So, to what extent are additional financing instruments such as interest-free and low interest bank loans important for the success of the Social Climate Fund? This is the question. And how should the banking sector in Bulgaria be involved?
Благодаря ви за въпроса.
Thank you for your question. The banking sector, for sure, needs to have additional fund. We don't expect, or it should have funding under the Social Climate Fund. As we saw, it's important as an administrator of programs for these households. So it would be a good idea for them to have access to Social Climate Fund in order for the measures to cover more people and not only 50 or 100,000 households, because indeed we currently don't have a lot of resources and we rely on the resources I mentioned by 2030. I hope that with the new multi-annual financial framework, which is under preparation now, we hope to see an addition and to have improvement. But firstly, this is an important task we are facing.
And one question just popped into the chat, and who is going to be responsible for the Social Climate Fund in Bulgaria? Do we know that already, or? What is the situation?
The fund, we don't know who managed the fund. The Energy Act contains a text that the authority to manage the Social Climate Fund will create the information system and will manage the information system for working with energy poor households. And we turned out to be in a vacuum. We don't have a specific authority and we cannot work with these households directly. For sure, this will be one of the ministries, either Ministry of Environment and Water or the Ministry of Regional Development and Public Works. I don't know, given the fact that most of the measures should be targeted at the transport sector, I even see the Ministry of Transport as a potential future managers of the fund, but it's up to the government to decide. I think it's important which authority will manage this fund because it affects the households. In reality, I personally see the management of this fund in the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, and I don't know why they are denying to participate in longer-term measures for working with households, because in my opinion, this fund should even be focused at the recipients of target funds for heating, and it will not be able to cover more than this group, and this group is well known to the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, and I don't know why they're denying their participation. This is a long debate, but the political decision can be different, and ultimately the coordination of these ministries remains very important. Irrespective of who will take on the fund, we should coordinate and agencies should work in unison together.
We have several more questions, here is one really interesting for me at least, and it is: what is the role of municipalities in the planning and implementation of the Social Climate Fund? Do they have a say about that?
Ролята е много важна. Реално би трябвало отделно.
The role is very important. They should be involved in the plan making, and for that purpose, the municipalities will need to be really familiar with the state of the building stock in Bulgaria, in their municipalities, and with the income of the residents, which is why one of the main recommendations that we have made both by the government and the WWF Bulgaria and other non-governmental business organizations is to develop a roadmap of the energy necessities based on the census from 2020. And there was also energy efficiency model that surveyed the living conditions. We have a lot of data, and in order to develop the plans, the municipalities need to have the data so that they can choose the best measures. Their participation is crucial, which is why in our project, we are working on a pilot project with 2 municipalities for this year. We have not started yet, but we believe that this is an important work that we are hoping to share with more municipalities. I don't know how the municipalities will be involved in the development of the plan. Will they have any responsibilities, or will only provide comments on the work of the fund, and maybe as part of a special commission under the consultative European Green Deal Committee with the ministry. Council of Ministers, but their involvement in the discussion is crucial because they are going to be the main beneficiaries in the future. They are going to run the programs and will have to find the vulnerable households they will be working with. They will be the ones that would distribute the measures and aid for transport if prices go up.
Have the municipalities that you mentioned of your biogas project have been chosen already?
В момента тече подбор на общините.
We are currently selecting the municipalities. We have an invitation until 31st of March for the municipalities to apply. These are municipalities that we have selected based on vulnerability of the regions based on the macroeconomic indicators for income, unemployment, and building stock condition, as we have it from the census of 2021. These are Lovech, Montana, Vidin, and Pazardzhik, the four regions. We are selecting the municipalities and everyone who wants to apply for the project. Habitat for Bulgaria has an application form that needs to be filled in by the municipalities, and we are hoping to develop good plans. But regardless of the municipalities we choose, we are going to share the methodology of development of the plans, the whole process, and we will have models that we share with everyone, and we will offer to be used by everyone in case this facilitates the municipalities and the government's work.
Which is really more of a statement, I guess. But how do you determine the potential impact level of the social climate fund for vulnerable groups? And are the allocated investments just a drop in the ocean?
Аз лично
Personally, I will have to calculate the impact based on data I have for Bulgaria. But I think there is survey of the Democracy Research Center from 2 years ago, although they have been they used narrower definition of energy poverty, not the one that was adopted last year. So this impact will have to be evaluated, but it's going to be much bigger than the average for the country due to the discrepancies, the inequalities in the whole country, which is 1.3% of the as I presented it from the Institute for Hungary. I expect this to be at least 5 to 10% of the expenditures for the poorest 20 to 30% of the population, because I'm not sure if you're aware that, but 75% of the household income goes for food and energy. Of the 75%, 15, an average of 15, that is for 25% goes for energy, and 50 to 60% goes for food. And the fuel price increase affects this element when we have increase of logistical expenditures, and the low-income households have much limited consumer basket. They are the ones that use these products, and the services that will be affected are, for example, culture. And I expect this impact to be much higher, and I am not sure how the government will be able to protect and limit the increase of this expenditure to provide, to make sure that the transport is still available to the vulnerable groups. As a matter of fact, in 2022, we had an increase in fuel prices, and the measures targeted those that mostly consume the fuels. Now it's time to turn the table and to target those that will be mostly affected by it.
Thank you all for these answers. And now we're going to go into a short break, and it's going to be a 10 minutes break, and then we're going to return. So you're going to have the opportunity to refresh and recharge and grab a snack and do a coffee. And so we'll meet up shortly for more engaging discussions. And this is basically probably the most important part of the day, our discussion, roundtable discussion, leave no one behind, the case of renovating single family housing stock. So thanks a lot, and see you in 10 minutes. I hope that you are all feeling refreshed and that we can shortly start our roundtable. So I'm going to welcome our panelists today, and they are Asia Dobrojalieva from Habitat for Humanity Bulgaria, Ina Karova from Energy Agency of Plovdiv, Dr. Anna Bayomi from FEANZA, European Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, and Teodora Peneva, who you just heard from WWF Bulgaria. I'm just going to give a short presentation of all of the panelists, and I'm going to start with Asia Dobrojalieva. Asia is one of the founders of the Association of Ecologists from Municipalities in Bulgaria in 1993, and she is the chairman of the associations and board of directors from 2003 to the present moment. Since 2010, she has been a project manager at Habitat for Humanity Bulgaria, and where she is mainly working to improve housing conditions in Bulgaria, eliminate housing and energy poverty, enhance energy efficiency, and achieve climate and neutrality goals. Dr. Anna Bayomi from FEANZA, she is the energy poverty policer at FEANZA, and she works for a socially fair energy transition, focusing on the renovation and decarbonization of vulnerable households living in the unfit housing stock. Among others, she has been a co-editor and author of the first European Energy Poverty Handbook, and she has a background in urban planning and social policy. Ina Karova from the Energy Agency of Plovdiv, she is a sustainable development expert there, and she is leading projects focusing on sustainable energy development and smart cities and communities. Her expertise is aligned with the necessities of the local authorities for local energy leadership, and her engagement with them reaches beyond sustainable development to citizen inclusion and empowerment in the energy and climate policies. Teodora, I'm not going to introduce you one more time, so we can just start a round table today, and the round table is going to last for roughly an hour, and we're going to discuss several topics about the case of renovating single-family housing stock in our part of Europe. So let's start and let's see what is the importance of building renovation to ensure inclusivity in our communities. And let's explore ways to leave no one behind in our pursuit of sustainable and equitable living environments. I'm just going to start with several questions just to break the ice, so to say, until we are in deeper discussions. So this is the first question to all of you. And why do you think that single-family buildings are lagging behind in support schemes for building renovation in our region? What are the reasons for this? And maybe we can have here 2 points of view, one from Bulgaria and one from Hungary. So who wants to start? Asia, I think that you may be the right person to do so.
Yeah, thank you first for the invitation and for organizing this forum. I will speak in Bulgarian because I think it is much better for me, and it will be much more clear what I want to say.
It's a good idea to say that in Bulgaria, the sector of single-owner family buildings is far behind all programs for support and encouraging the participation of people in the process of renovation. Perhaps it's important to underline that the approach the government is having in Bulgaria does not allow single household buildings to have access to funding. And I would like to turn your attention to the fact that the long-term strategies for building stock renovation adopted are for encouraging. And this is in the name of the strategy. And it's a part of the policy of the European Union, how the state should support and encourage the process of renovation, and not how the state should use 100% grant for renovating a certain number of buildings. The process needs to be supported. In other words, people should be encouraged to carry out activities for deep energy renovation of their buildings by providing facilities, for example, to overcome the technical issues to do with the organization of the renovation as a process, and providing the necessary project documentation for this, but at the same time, partial funding using grants or low interest rate or interest-free loans, like the case in France, in order to encourage the use of private resources of people in the banking sector and the resources provided by the state and the different programs, in order to have wide access to such financing on behalf of all owners of buildings in Bulgaria. And let me underline that the logic of the state is not like this, and we are fighting this for more than 10 years. When the national program for energy efficiency of multi-family buildings was announced, and this model, unfortunately, exists only in Bulgaria. Nowhere else in the European do have such an approach. And as one colleague said, there is no such approach in the world as well. It lacks any economic and social logic, because we think that there is a large social inequality, because in Bulgaria, currently about 3,000 buildings had access with the 100% grant for energy efficiency. And let's not forget that we have 63,000 buildings, multifamily buildings, while the single-family buildings are 1.3 million. And in practice, the population living in multifamily buildings so we have a 50-50% distribution between people who live in multifamily and single household buildings. So the current approach ignores single household buildings. Let me finish here in order to allow the other participants to also share their views.
I would like maybe to hear your opinion. Do you have an overview of what is happening on an EU level in regard to support of single-family housing and in regard of supporting the vulnerable people living there?
Thank you. So, at a European level, the last year was quite an important year because they were updating the European directive on the energy performance of buildings, which exists since a long time, but previously it only set quite strong measures for newly built homes, but had no requirement for the renovation of the existing building stock, which is I think one of the main reason why member states were not motivated to tackle the single family homes because the more binding targets were all related to emission reduction and renewable energy. And in order to meet these targets, member states were going to the lower hanging fruits, which means that it's easier to insulate multi-apartment buildings, even if these are not the worst performing ones and they're quite well performing compared to the single family homes. So the lack of binding targets at the European level and also the lack of monitoring of strategies was one of the reasons why not much has happened. Hungary, for example, promised to renovate 600,000 units in 5 years between 2015 and 2020, and they managed to support around 30,000 households in 5 years, which is like 1/3 of the ideal yearly renovation rate. So they are really, really lagging behind. And getting back to the EPBD, the original proposition from the Commission and the Parliament suggested a very ambitious minimum energy performance standards for the residential building stock, which would have meant that all homes that have a rating lower than D should be renovated at a certain level until 2030, and then even at a higher level until 2035. But then this proposition was voted down by the Council, which represents the member states, because member states were afraid of this for different reasons. And some reasons were the lack of political will to implement this, but also we should admit that this suggestion on the minimum energy performance standards was too ambitious, because in the case of Hungary, it would have meant that 2/3 of the building stock should have been renovated in 6 years, which is ridiculously, like, it's a ridiculous level, because if you look at the current renovation rates, it's impossible. But this is also how usually the propositions work, that the Commission and the Parliament must go to a high ambition, because then the member states will water it down. And today we have the final vote of the European directive at the European Parliament, which is it seemed to be quite secure, but now some parties and some country representatives are not really willing to support it. So we don't know yet if it will go through or will fail at the very, very last point of the very complicated process. But if it goes through, and if I have one final minute, now the final solution for the renovation of the residential stock is that member states should reach 16% of energy saving and half until 2030, if I remember correctly. But the most important is that half of the energy savings that they achieve from the building stock, they should do it in the worst performing stock, which sounds great. But the worst performing stock is defined in a large way, which it means that it's 45%, if I remember correctly, of the entire building stock. And if we think that half of 16% of energy saving, which is like 8%, goes to half of the building stock, it's not much compared to the extent of inefficient buildings. And also it still allows member states to pick the lower hanging fruits, maybe to change the windows in a lot of buildings which are just under the limitation, so falls into the worst performing category, doing superficial measures in many of them and not touching the real worst performing buildings, the individual homes in the countryside that were built before any energy regulations.
Thank you, Anna, for your answer. Now I would like to include Ina and Teodoro in the conversation. Ina, I have a question for you because I know that you are working on one-stop shops, and this is going to be the topic of the whole day tomorrow. But do you think that one-stop shops have some role to play in the renovation of single-family houses, and how can we communicate better with the citizens, and how we can demand from the government to have support mechanisms. So basically, what is the most successful ways, in your opinion, to kind of ask for the support of the 50% of the population in Bulgaria?
Да, със сигурност тези...
For sure, these one-stop shop have proven to be very successful and useful for citizens, businesses, people dealing with the creation and implementation of policies. In Bulgaria, we have such pilot one-stop shops. One of them is here in Plovdiv. Now, to explain, I will go back to what Asia mentioned as regards the multifamily buildings and the one household of people. The statistics is 50-50. The multifamily are fewer, but in terms of built-up area, they're the same as a single family. And this domination of multifamily buildings over single family came 10 years ago with the adoption of the national program, which favors multifamily buildings because it considers that addressing a larger building is easier, so to say, in terms of procedures and administrative procedures to happen with public funds rather than targeting smaller and a larger number of buildings. And they wanted to achieve larger savings. And as we know, multifamily buildings in Bulgaria are quite old, and they can provide a lot of the savings that the national authorities are striving for. That's why the national program favors the multifamily buildings. At the same time, when it appeared, it started by offering 100% grant by the state, and thus it became very attractive for people. And this suppressed the launching of other funding instruments, which to make people understand the value of renovation. Because if you have 100% grant, then it undervalued the value of renovation, not only from the viewpoint of energy efficiency, comfort, and savings achieved. And in this way, the other tools weren't developed, didn't manage to emerge on the market in order to reach the other segments. We're talking about single family buildings, but very often the market incentive is that single family buildings can use a loan through which to adopt the measures and the like. And here is the role of one-stop shops, that the whole process, they not only facilitate the process, they make it easier in each of its steps, and not only in terms of providing information for citizens what they can do on their building, what is good quality of implementation of the measures, but they also provide a link to suppliers of such services, of developers, but also funding. In Bulgaria, one-stop shops work with national funding, but they have nothing else to promote with regard to the other market segments. For example, single-family buildings, households which are vulnerable and energy poor, the emerging energy communities. So one-stop shops which exist are limited in promoting the renovation wave, unfortunately, because of the domination of the national program. And last but not least, the renovation wave so far in Bulgaria is based on the national program only, and we see that once the intensity is decreasing, people will find it hard to set things moving in other conditions with other financial conditions, because the only thing which is changing are the financial conditions in order to make it attractive for people, both in multifamily and in single-family buildings.
Thank you, Ina, for your answer. And I just want to refer to the if we take the case of Bulgaria, we have a long-term building renovation strategy in Bulgaria. And there we have said that we have to renovate, we have certain targets for building renovation till 2030, 2040, 2050. We have targets clearly written there. And we have also targets for single family buildings, if I'm not mistaken, over there, but nothing is happening and they're not being targeted. And so we have a strategy which we are not implementing. And how can we how can we change that? Basically, this is my question to all of you.
Аз бих могла да започна.
I can start unless Teddy is ready because she hasn't taken the floor yet. Teddy? Then I will answer the question since I took the floor already. This is, in fact, one of the it's an evidence that Bulgaria has no will to implement changes to the benefit of the whole society that as we should have. Once again, we have something bravely said, something that serves financial and private interests. The fact that we have 100% grant allows the whole process, maybe not just allows it, this is the only way to do it, the whole process to be administered by the municipalities. They assign the public procurement, and as you know, in Bulgaria, we have great distortions when it comes to assigning public tenders and the selection of a contractor, unfortunately, I should say. But what is even worse, it is not the fact that the process is being distorted, it is the fact that the homeowners are waiting to receive a ready-made result that provides them with economic benefits, improving the quality of their living environment and benefits for the environment itself. The problem, however, is the quality of building renovation is very compromised. And instead of achieving deep renovation of the buildings to the highest possible degree, the first program renovated up until class C only, with 100% grant. The current program under the National Recovery and Resilience Plan provides for higher class B. We really insisted on demanding the maximum and to look for all opportunity to achieve the best. I know this is not possible, but at least we should have set a higher ambition. Instead, we did not have any ambition. The whole process needs to come out of the municipality's capacity because this is not their role. What I mean is the municipal administration that should provide services for the population and should look after everything that has public interest, road, infrastructure, parks, etc. But when it comes to the private residential buildings and owned by private owners, homeowners, In my opinion, it is absolutely wrong to leave the whole responsibility to the municipalities, because this is not a job inherent to the municipalities, although they learn how to do that and they play the role of a one-stop shop. The municipalities provide this technical service, but that deprive the model of its actual market essence, because the energy efficiency, the investments in energy efficiency are returnable. These are not funds that disappear. These are funds that throughout the years, for a period of 7 to 10 years, depending on the scale of the renovation and the measures that are being implemented, the prices at a certain moment, they result in decrease of cost and economically beneficial activity. We deprived it of its sense, of its market sense, and we turn it into administration by municipalities, which is a model that need to be put an end to if we want to achieve the goals, as you have already said. And for that, the municipalities need to be excluded from the process. They could provide information, they could provide support, but they shouldn't be the ones assigning the public procurement. It is time for the homeowners to take their role, to enter the process with the responsibilities that fall for them, because given the rate that Bulgaria is following with 100% grants and 2,000 buildings for a period of 7 years, you can imagine that we are not going to achieve any goals. And in addition to that, the one-family buildings are excluded from the process, just like other 60,000 buildings, multi-family buildings that will not have 100% access to grant funding, which is the wrong type of policy and decisions that are not for in the public interest, but serve only economic and private interests.
Thank you, Asia. And now I see that Ina has something to say on the matter.
По отношение на амбициите,
in terms of the ambitions, we in Bulgaria live in a paradox. The European regulation sets building ambitions, which is good, because if there is no one to push us forward, we will not be moving at all. The ambitions, however, have been set in a way that the rate we achieve them should be very fast. However, in our own reality, where the paradox comes, we are not that fast. We do not have the instruments. We have the policies, yes, in words. Everything is very well explained. We have the statistics, the rate that we should follow in the building renovation. But in fact, not only Bulgaria, but also elsewhere in Europe, where they have one-stop shop, things happen much slowly, because renovating a building, be it one or multi-family building, takes time. It takes technological time. And if you add other components to the process, things become even more complex. The Bulgarian national program with low standards made it so that in several years, requirements, the buildings that we have already renovated will no longer cover the requirements, most likely. And the investment that we have already made, which is very generous, will be devaluated once again. And that means that we'll keep chasing the rabbit by setting goals that seem high, but we make them moderate so that we can achieve them. And at the end of the day, we are not moving forward towards achieving the goals, because we put them at the minimum of the ambition that in several years they are below the minimum. And that lack of moving forward fast will not take us far.
Thank you, Ina. And I would like now to include Theodora Penever in the conversation with a question basically, and what should be done in your opinion, in order to support the poorest, the most vulnerable groups of the population in our region?
Да, аз ще отговоря, но ми се искаше да кажа...
I will answer that question, but I want to say that first of all, regardless of how the funds are being administered, we have problem with the fact that we do not have enough funds. We cannot talk about 20,000 houses per year for a 5-year plan, which is for the social climate fund, which is below 100 million. We cannot talk about decarbonization with 150 million for all citizens, and to think that we are doing anything. The government needs to provide resources, even for the banks. This is a must. And in my opinion, we should not exclude any participant from the energy efficiency market. On the contrary, that resource needs to be provided through all possible channels. And thirdly, we should not put one type of measures against others. Yes, we can say that we do not have anything for single-family homes, and we need to have a long-term program for single-family home, just like for multi-family homes. There shouldn't be any competition between the two segments. They should work together, and we should have at least 10% set aside for deep renovation, and maybe even partially, because there are people that will not be able to receive any resource and need to have at least 10% of the fund for window framing change, which could cost 20% of the energy cost and would come as relief for those that cannot invest any of their own funds, which is why we need to use all channels and provide resources for all funds, and targeting the most vulnerable groups for the region. Our region is one of the most affected in Central and Eastern Europe. The situation in Bulgaria is no different than in Romania or any of the neighboring countries. Yes, there are differences. The types of heating that are being used, there are differences in the overall change. There is a liberalized energy market. There are financial instruments, but overall, the percentage is impossibly high. And we are working based on the evaluation of this shortage. And we need to provide additional resources for them. And besides channels and funds, we need to have a fund for the energy poor families. And there are no such funds. And at the European Union level, the Just Transition conference in Brussels is now discussing to link all funds for social criteria to have social adequate financing, but all of them need to be linked to social conditions. We need to learn how to work with these groups. We cannot keep delaying, because now we are hearing a discussion about stop taking exercise. You either work with the lowest income households, or you do not receive any financial resources. And we may end up in the situation, just like at the moment, to be with the lowest funding among all European Union countries just because we do not want to work with these groups. I don't know how to force the government to start working with the most vulnerable groups. This is a very important element that will prove to be crucial in the future. And this does not exclude the middle class. We always talk about differentiated aid to move it at least to the average salary. And if you do not include the middle class, we will not be able to achieve anything because the middle class is thinning out, given all the loans they have taken so far.
Asia, I fully agree with what Teodora said. This is key, and this is something missing in Bulgaria. We lack long-term financing. We have program financing, and this is a wrong approach. It changes and impacts the business dealing with this. I mean the designers, energy auditors, developers, construction companies. So in our case, it's a wave of renovation. It shouldn't be a small wave. And then having 5 years of nothing. The state should systematically, through the Bulgarian national budget, take from its own budget and to spend it on renovation. And the renovation should be supported irrespective of whether we have European funds or not. Every European funding will allow the funds under these resources to increase, but the system needs to systemically support and have annual budget for this type of activity. Of course, this can happen through the decarbonization fund. Let me just give an example of Slovakia. In 1995, it created a national housing fund. Using it over 20 years, it managed to finance almost full renovation of the housing fund in Slovakia. Whoever has gone to Bratislava has seen that there is no multifamily building which is not renovated. 95% of the buildings have been renovated. As a whole, over 70% of the building stock has been renovated, and all of this is done on a systematic level with funding including 25 to 30% grant, which is encouraging and stimulating, and cheap financing, cheap loans households can access. And the banking sector in this country has been included. It is participating, it is providing cheap financial resources. They are not interest-free in Slovakia, unlike the case in France. They are low interest rate, but this is affordable for households because there is predictability, there is transparency, there is support in the processes, and I fully agree with Teodora Peneva that the funding, even now, is meant to target the most vulnerable groups and the energy poor people. Having a 100% grant is given to everybody living in the country, in the building, irrespective of their income, and this is a wrong approach. We made a proposal for the introduction of a differentiated funding and for 100% grant to be permissible only for people who are energy poor, who have low income, and not for all people living in this building. But this is not done still. And this is the key. We need to be able to target the funding and not to choose the easiest possible option for the administration, having 100% for everybody as a grant.
Ina, I see that you want to interject to say something.
Yes, full support. I fully support Asya Dobrojulieva for the example that she gave. Probably in a perfect world, things should happen with a mixed form of financing, with targeting the users and differentiating how they can do the financing. But in the discussion, we always seem to say that the state is responsible, but state authorities are not doing a good job if we are mentioning all of this and if we have such public attitudes on the topic. And another thing, public funding, no matter how much we talk about this, no matter how intensively talk about this, public funds will never be enough. And the member states understood this, the European Commission understood this, and we expect to see the guidelines on how Article 40 of the directive will be implemented. And the process at the current time, when the resources are finishing and there is a new program period which is coming and we should think about it, the discussion should be revolved around targeting users so that everybody has equal access to public funds. Everybody should have fair access with regard to differentiating these amounts and their intensity. And last but not least, we need to have stable facilitation of the entire process, because people give up when the process is very complex and very risky for them in terms of the technical parameters and in terms of the financing. We need experts able to lead the citizens, to give them the appropriate pieces of advice, and to give them invaluable information of financial and technical nature about how to renovate their building. Currently, people know about the benefits. You don't need to convince people about the benefits of renovation. We need to convince them that there is somebody, let's say an expert, who would make this complex process easier, somebody they can trust, because trust is an issue in Bulgaria. Including financial institutions is key, because it's all too easy to say that the member states should find a way to include financial institutions, but when they don't see their benefit from the situation, when there is no such benefit for financial institutions, you cannot move things forward. The renovation of multifamily and single-family buildings is a market niche for banks. This is true. We know how construction flourished in Bulgaria, but why do we need new buildings when the old ones are not in a good state? Probably we need to have a change in the paradigm in which businesses are thinking about the renovation, about financial institutions which provide the funding for new housing, while they can provide funding for maintenance of old buildings. This will be a slow process, and probably it will not start until the beginning of the next programming period, so it's not worthwhile discussing it now.
Thank you, Ina. I want to remind everyone, our viewers, that they can ask questions in the chat in Zoom, in the Q&A area, and also through our channels to our panelists. And I want to turn back to Anna, to you, and ask you, listening to all of that, to the realities happening in Bulgaria. I guess the realities are not so different from what is happening in Romania and Hungary, where you're from. So, what are the key takeaways? What is your opinion? What should we change? and how?
Thank you for the question. Well, at the national level is always very difficult because unfortunately I have no answer how to change the political will of governments. But recently we in the office we have been looking at the different benefits of energy efficient renovations, and different studies shows that investing in the worst performing segment of buildings, which are often in Central and Eastern European countries, the single family units, has the quickest financial returns for governments. So it's not charity or it's not a waste of money, but renovating, for example, an unfit housing unit will return in 1.5 years just regarding the health saving costs. Apologies for the noise. I hope it's not very disturbing, but they are doing some renovations in the house. Unfortunately, not energy efficiency measures. So the returns are super quick in terms of other budgetary savings, such as health measures or employment benefits and so on. And what the European Union would do is to really push member states to take into account these kind of savings, because maybe it will make more attractive the renovations. But I know that probably this is also an idealistic opinion. And then I think the different planning tools that member states need to do, the NECPs, the renovation strategies, the social climate plans. Also, there will be heating and cooling plans for larger settlements. Ideally, the Commission, but in reality, NGOs should really take these plans under scrutiny and point out the weaknesses and communicate it to the government and the Commission to highlight that if these plans are not coordinated or the implementation tools are not put next to the targets, then it's not only the households that are living in these buildings will be left behind, but the climate targets won't be reached. And as it has been also discussed, like the financing is one of the most important elements, because we need to cover upfront costs of lower income groups, possibly 100%. And as I already mentioned, this investment seems a lot, but it will return really quickly. And also in Belgium, which is one of the richest countries of Europe, they found out that half of the population is not able to finance the renovation, and around third of them, like not the population but homeowners, are not able to finance the renovations, and third of the homeowners are not even able to go to a bank because they already have a mortgage, or because simply they are in a financial situation that the bank wouldn't give them a loan. So I know that it's a difficult exercise, but they should really ring fence and prioritize ring fence money from EU funding, and social conditionality is also a key element, because unfortunately the directive is not really strong enough. But if member states cannot access generic funding until they tackle the worst performing building stock, then maybe it will be a motivation for them to act. And also one-stop shops and different assistance programs are crucial. Technical assistance, but also administrative and social assistance is quite cheap compared to the costs of renovations, but is a key factor. So basically in every village, neighborhood, there should be an office with social worker, and financial experts and so on to manage the access to funding and so on. And a last thing that I wanted to say is that households that are living in diverse performing stock are often facing multiple vulnerabilities, and these also need to be taken into consideration when managing the renovations, and also in cities, but it's more maybe a problem of multi-apartment buildings, and in the private rental sector, rent increases or the eviction of vulnerable groups in large renovation programs is also unfortunately a negative consequence of these interventions. So the social impact of every uh, energy efficiency measure should be taken into consideration, whether it is the inability to access the benefits of it or the danger of the implementation to vulnerable groups.
Thank you, Anna. We'll be wrapping up this panel pretty soon, and I'm going to give all the panelists a chance to say their their final comments in about a minute. But first, I want to return to Asia about something that she said earlier about the quality of building renovation. We know that the quality of building renovation is really low in Bulgaria, unfortunately, for multifamily buildings due to variety of reasons. And basically, this is one of the reasons why the population in general, they don't really trust what is going on. And just last week, I had a long conversation with someone who was trying in a multi-apartment building, which was renovated and which had multiple problems. And kind of these problems, they were wrapped up behind, they were just hidden somehow by the local municipality, by the local company who did the renovation work, and so and so. So the thing is that my question is, shouldn't the quality of the renovation be much more closely monitored by citizens living in single-family houses? Shouldn't the quality of renovation will be much better there? For example, if my house is being renovated, I would really like to monitor every single thing that is happening. And shouldn't the quality of the renovation really increase when and if there is a program for renovation of single family buildings? This is my question to you, Asia.
I'm convinced that once an owner is paying out of their own pocket, they want to ensure high quality of the work they will receive. And this is the phenomenon that we have with the 100% grant. In Bulgaria, we have a saying which is very suitable for depiction of this. If they give you a grant, you don't find downsides to it. And the people are just side observers. People don't get involved. We know this is a hard process. We know that working together in Bulgaria is very hard. And I'm convinced that for one family buildings, it won't be an issue because the responsibility is with one owner or two, depending on how things are, but limited number of owners. When the owners participate in the funding of the renovation, it will be done with a high quality, and I have no doubts about this. Let me just turn your attention to the fact that in Bulgaria, the ventilation of the premises is not a topic which is in the focus, because the provision of high quality air inside the premises is of key importance, and it needs to be a part of the measures which are being implemented in the energy efficiency renovation of buildings, which is not a practice in Bulgaria. In most European countries, these activities for providing the quality of air inside the premise are obligatory, while in Bulgaria, the focus is on changing the window panes and placing external heat insulation for the outside walls. But we lack sufficiently ambitious goals and the desire to achieve the maximum result from what we're doing. And I'm convinced that as regards single-family buildings, the interests of the owners will be much higher, and they will require to have higher quality, and owners themselves need to be supported, need to have support to cheap financial borrowed resources in order to give a stimulus and an impetus for renovation, so that it is clear that this is an investment in the future which makes sense for every household, because prices of energy are yet to become higher. And this is the downside to the regulated energy prices, that they create a feeling that the price of electricity is affordable, while in fact the price of electricity may turn out to be much higher, and then their share in the household costs would be much higher. And it should be clear for everybody that the cheapest energy is the saved energy. So energy efficiency does not allow us to decrease the energy consumption, allows us to decrease the energy consumption, which means that we are able, through energy efficiency, to reduce our bills. Energy efficiency are not the only option for this. Let me not mention about the other options, which are for RES, changing the behavior. But the moment energy market is liberated, people will quickly realize why it is important to have energy efficient renovation of their houses, and will be stimulated to look for all options in order to implement this for their buildings. And now is the time for the state to step in, to encourage, to support, and not to do our job for us. We as owners need to do our job, and we should be supported, encouraged fairly and in line with our incomes and needs. We should have this, and this should be systematic as a measure provided by the state within its annual budgets. This funding should be systematic with the support of the European funds.
Thank you, Asia. Now I'm going to give the chance to Ina, Teodora, and Tana to say their final words for the panel. So you have about 1 minute each if you want to use this time.
Ина или аз да се включа?
You can go, Teodora.
Okay, добре.
All right. As a conclusion, I fully agree that each one of us needs to take their responsibility to be as active as possible. But first and foremost, the government needs to create information systems for the households' income, so that that would allow all organizations, energy providers, participation, and quite soon banks and municipalities to be able to work with them. And this information system will have 2 million euro under Repower EU, and I cannot understand why it's not being implemented now to be included in the second phase so that it would support the use of energy schemes. We need, in order for us to take our responsibility, the government, the state needs to do their job. And I will say one thing, a tax relief for energy efficiency measures. There are ways to develop, and this is possible, but there are no resources, and we needed to support the second and all subsequent phases as financial aid for the residents, including providing solar panels. My call is for fast reaction.
There is actually a question in Zoom in the chat, but I think that we can all answer it. And it is about the second stage of the building renovation program in Bulgaria for the multifamily buildings. And how would you comment that in the stage two of the building renovation program, there are currently 289 submitted project application, even with an increased deadline, and the deadline was increased twice. So I think that we have talked about that, but maybe someone could just answer very briefly.
Ако може да си позволя, доколкото знам.
I will try to answer. As far as I know, this financial resource that hasn't been used will be redirected for a 100% grant. This is the unofficial information that I have. Allow me to say a few words as well. We are not surprised that the applications are so few simply because these were the rumors. Do not apply because when we do, if we don't, then we will receive 100% grants as well. This is a distortion that happened, and we have said it many times, that the main reform in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan needs to be this change from 100% grant to 80% grant and gradual reduction of these percentages. With this being announced publicly, the people will know that if this year the grant is 80%, next year it will be 60, 40. If that was so, the interest would have been much greater. But since our politicians send misleading signals, and so far everyone has heard the three commissions in the parliament that have voted for a provision of funds from the state budget, the funds that will be needed for 100% funding for the building that have applied but have not been qualified for the first stage. Until while we have such unreasonable political class that distorts the people's sentiments, we are not going to see interest. But if you know that the grant will be 60% next year and then 40% and down to 25%, I am absolutely certain that we will not have had only 289 applications, but all those 2,000 that have not been qualified would have applied for this 80% grant. But because our politicians are quite populist for many reasons, this has led to this result.
Thank you for the answer, Asia. Now, Ina, you can take your final comment.
Кратко включване.
I will be very brief. About the new applications. Actually, we don't know how new they are and how many of them have been the reserve from the 100% grant, who decided that they should try to get even 80% instead of losing everything because they have to pay the building passports. You know that the people are trying, those that were reserved for the 100% are now really trying to succeed. These statistics of 289 applications, we don't really know how many of them are completely new. On my part, in conclusion, I share the skepticism of my colleagues. We are experts, we know each other, we believe in our common sense. We often discuss these topics, we have the same position, but unfortunately, we are not being heard. Our messages do not reach the people in power, at least not in their fullness. And what is even most unfortunately, Europe has many working models that have proven that things can happen with different organization methodology, and what costs so much effort and resources, which is the concerns of the bureaucrats. But hopefully things will change both among people in financial institutions and among the business, the national authorities, so that we can come to a working model where everyone will be happy.
Thank you, Ina. And now, Anna, you have the chance for your final words for this panel, and then we're going to close the day.
Thank you. So I think the most crucial thing is to make sure that enough funding is there to renovate these buildings, taking into account that we will have really great benefit to do after doing the jobs. People will be healthier. They will miss less days of school and work and so on. They will start to pay taxes if they get employed in the renovation sector. But with the design of funding, we need to make sure that it arrives first to the poorest, and the 100% of upfront costs are covered for at least the poorer part of the society, and then the amount of funding is decreasing, and we are not subsidizing wealthy households who can go simply to the bank to ask for a loan. And then the other important message is to, after the directives have been accepted, to really scrutinize the plans to make them implemented, and to do a quality check and highlight where are the missing points. So this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks to the all panelists and the presenters before that. And so with that, I'm going to close the day, and I hope to see you all tomorrow at the same time when we are going to speak about to talk about one-stop shops and what is the role of one-stop shops for building renovation. We will start with providing an overview of the European Union's perspective of one-stop shops and showcase several examples, and delve into the role of the one-stop shops as a pivotal tool for scaling up building renovation, and to do it on a quality basis. So thanks all once again, and with this I'm closing the day, and see you all tomorrow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Довиждане, хубав ден на всички.
Довиждане. Bye bye.